the third in a series of webinars we've been running here at Travellers since the summer on cyber. First off, in June, we had how to sell cyber and to overcome some of those objections with conversations with your clients. Then we had in August, I think, cyber return to the office to look at some of the risks associated with returning to the office and restarting the business after lockdown. And today we're covering off demystifying cyber risk. But some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You may have just noticed that we will be recording this webinar and sharing with those who can make it to the live event today. But please note, only speakers and the presentation will be visually and audibly recorded. We won't be able to see you or any of the attendees. You might have already noticed as well that panelists can't hear you. Attendees are muted so that our panelists can be heard clearly at all times. So please don't ask anything verbally. However, we will be taking questions throughout the event and we'll be doing so via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, and some people already have so far, just pop them in there and our panel will address them at the end of the session. You will also have the ability to upvote questions there. So if you see that someone's already asked something that you'd like to know the answer to, give it a thumbs up and we can see that it's a popular ask. And finally, we'll have a few interactive polls. So get your fingers on the buzzer, ready to take part in those as well. So now we're just going to have a little legal notice that will pop up on the screen in front of you about this webinar. So let's kick off. So what's on the agenda today? First up, we've got Lisa Farr. Lisa is one of our cyber underwriters and she's going to help you sound cyber savvy when talking to your clients. Next, unfortunately, you've got me again, and we've got a little game of higher or lower. Then we have Mark Lawrence, an underwriting manager in our technology practice, and Mark's going to discuss that's a tech issue. And finally, before questions at the end, we have Davis Kessler, Head of Cyber for Travellers, and Davis is going to do some cyber insurance jargon busting. So, the whole session today is aimed at how we can help you. It's all about knowing the terminology, knowing what your clients are up against can really help build a picture of the risks and the importance of having cyber cover in place. Know the losses. It's always good to be up to date on the kind of security that's available, as well as claim stories to help you have those conversations with your clients to build your reputation as a trusted advisor. And know the insurance. Well, that speaks for itself. With so many insurance professionals like you on this webinar, and with around 7 in 10 businesses reporting to not being insured against cyber risks in some way or another, and 50% of all businesses reporting to having a cyber attack in the last 12 months. It's up to us as an industry to continue to educate. But now I'm going to pass over to Lisa Farr, who's going to make you sound cyber savvy. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, James, and good morning, everybody. We've all been on webinars and calls, listening to cyber technical experts speaking their jargon and throwing around their cyber words. And it's actually not as alien as what some people may think once understood. And whilst this section is how to sound cyber savvy, I find it best to explain in plain old English, which I think goes a long way with your clients in helping them to understand their exposures. So if we start with abbreviations, you'll see most of these in props and emails, and I'm guilty of using some of these myself when requesting further information. Some are straightforward, some we've heard, some we haven't, and I'm just going to pick out a few to try to explain them. So does the client have an IDS? What's that? Well, it's a software. It's a software that will monitor the client's network, and its aim is to discover or identify any malicious emails or any activity by monitoring the network and providing automatic alerts to prevent any kind of intrusion into the network. And I like to think about it in human terms. So a bouncer on a door checking IDs to see if you're above age and if you're actually allowed to come in. Whereas if we move on to an EDR, Firstly, an endpoint detection and response. Firstly, what is an endpoint? It's actually just a device at the end of a network, so a laptop, a desktop, or a mobile phone even. And what does it do? Well, it's real time, so it's proactive software. It's constantly detecting activity that's suspicious, and any advanced threat to the endpoint, so any advanced threat to all of our computers. So going back to the earlier human example, it's like the bouncer may have let the person into the club, but now the bar staff are the extra eyes and the extra ears and making sure that people are not getting really drunk, but in cyber terms, acting suspiciously. And if they are acting suspiciously, then they're removed from the premises, so they're removed from the network. It's an alert, it's detection, and it's a response system, and that is what an EDR does. And it's a great control to have, especially if your clients have been unfortunate to have suffered an incident in the past. MFA. What's MFA? Multi-factor it's just two or more means for identifying an individual has rights to a network. So like a human would provide two or more means of like a proof of address and a passport, a business should be confirming who their employees are as well, and they are who they say they are once they are logging in remotely. This is usually a username and password, and it's followed up with a PIN. The PIN is sent normally by text to a registered mobile phone of the user. Most of us have been doing this when we've been working from home, and we don't know how long we are going to be working from home for. So these are definitely discussions you should be having with your clients, because they're a strong, good control to have in place. Now, if we move on to the next page, malware, for the lack of some of these controls, malware is a catch-all term for all types of malicious software. You can see there's lots of malware. I mean, viruses are more specific types of malware. They self-replicate and then insert codes into programs, and then they gain access through lack of controls, such as no antivirus software. Spyware, well, that's just as it sounds, really. Gone are the days of a man following someone around in sunglasses, a long beige coat and hat, trying to find information and secrets on someone and their company. I mean, why bother when you can just install this malicious software on a device, and this can do it all for you, recording all the online activity of the employee and the firm, and collecting all that information to be fraudulently used. So how do the threat actors even do this? And again, as another cyber term I've just thrown in, threat actor. What even is a threat actor? Well, threat actors or bad actors, they're basically just cyber criminals trying to get access into a network, and they can be anyone from a student in their room to a big organised crime group. And these threat actors will normally do this. They've got loads of techniques out there, but common one being phishing is what we hear of a lot. Phishing is normally conducted via email. Could also be by text. I've received many phishing texts myself. The fraudster goes phishing. They send out lots and lots of emails, waiting for someone to buy it, and someone will buy it. Your employee receives an email. It's not genuine, of course. It contains a malicious link to a website that mimics a genuine website. So say for a bank, for an example. Once the employee clicks on that link, they can either install malware on their computer, but normally they're asking for their username and password. They're asking for their credentials. And then once the employee or anyone enters that, well, like the little fish that goes and bites for the food, there's normally trouble ahead. You've got spear phishing, and that's normally just a more targeted. Whereas open ports is slightly more technical, but trying to explain it in kind of an easier terminology. And open ports are essentially like a window. So if you think about a firewall being a huge brick wall, red brick wall around a company's network. Now think of this brick wall as having windows, and some of these windows have to be left open, and these ports have to be left open. And why? Because some of them have to be left open to receive emails, for an example, because the emails flow through this open port, otherwise we wouldn't be able to receive or send external emails. But some ports, some windows, they do not actually have to be left open. There isn't a need for them to be left open, but yet some companies do leave these windows open. And this is how the bad guys get through. Normally the open ports are left open because it's normally a default and IT haven't closed or shut the window yet. And fraudsters, what they do is they buy tools online and they scan all the open ports across the whole internet. And they scan for companies with just these sitting there with these open ports. And this is why I think when companies say, oh no, we're too small to be a target, we're not affected. Well, it's not always the case, because if you think about it, a robber might be eyeing up the nice big house with the nice big car outside, but if the little house next door with the not so nice car outside has got the windows open, well, that just makes their job so much easier, because they're going to climb through that window rather than smash the windows of the big house, which is the big corporate company, and cause a scene. And these open ports, these are one of the methods on how to conduct a ransom attack. So if we move on to the next slide, we will see that there's lots of different types of ransom attacks. But you've got a blocker ransom. These will lock you out of your computer functions, so you're unable to use it at all, apart from paying the ransom, of course. And then you've got a crypto ransomware, which encrypts all the files on your computer. You cannot access them and demands a payment to decrypt them. Now, the secret key, the decryption key, that's normally only available once you pay the ransom, and most of the hackers are actually quite honest. They will provide the key once ransom is paid. And as we can see, there's lots of different types of ransomware. The first reported ransom attack was in the late 80s. Through the good old-fashioned floppy disks, which some may remember on the call. I think the victim was requested to pay only $189 to a post office box. Fast forward 30 years later, they're much more sophisticated today, and of course the demand has increased. So six-figure requests are quite the norm. Even requests into millions of dollars is not uncommon. And rather than sending your check off, most ransoms today are paid in bitcoins. And Bitcoin, again, that's just an electronic virtual currency. You can see Maze is on there, and what Maze actually do, they have their own website where they will post the stolen data of their victims. And it's actually quite interesting now, because the threat actors they're not only demanding a ransom to decrypt the computers and give you back your systems, but they're also demanding an additional ransom to stop them from releasing the data that they've already stolen and already seen once they've been into your system, because it seems that one ransom is not enough. You got WannaCry there, that was one of the biggest attacks on the NHS, which led to operations being cancelled, and some of these other groups will sell data such as credit card information onto the dark web. So the dark web is being another cyber term. What even is it? Firstly, it cannot be accessed through our computers. Me or you cannot access it unless you've got a certain software on your computer that allows you to get into it. You can't access it through Google or anything like that. But you can buy anything on the dark web, from payment card information for as little as $20 if those payment card information has got further information about the user, such as addresses, for an example. It can cost more. Some of them may work, some of them may not work. But secondly, the dark web is huge. It's massive, and I like to think about it as like an iceberg. So anything above the waterline is the internet, the everyday use by me or you, and everything below the waterline on the iceberg is the dark web. So that's a huge place for activity to be going on. So I will leave you to digest that thought and hand you back to James, our regional distribution manager, who's going to play an interactive claims game with us. So James, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Took a few notes there. Spies, bouncers, nightclubs, robbers, floppy disks and icebergs. Let's just understand what some of your homework must have been. So right now we're going to have a bit of an interactive game now. We're going to have a game of higher and lower and sort of what could go wrong. give you a bit of context before we start, one small business in the UK is successfully hacked every 19 seconds, and around 32% of SMEs were attacked at least once a week in 2020. So let's look at what could go wrong, what that hack could look like, and what it could cost a business. So we're now going to talk through a few simple claim scenarios and show you a cost. Your job will simply be to respond to that cost on a poll or on the chat with either higher or lower. But before you ask, you don't get anything for a pair, not in this game. And that's my one and only Bruce Forsyth impression, and it was pretty bad. So let's have a look at this scenario, which is a retail outlet. So a hacker obtains some sensitive information, personal information, from the shop's computer system. And as a result, the insured needs to notify all affected customers, which they would obviously have to do under GDPR. A number of those customers then bring a claim against the insured for allowing access to their personal information. So we've got a number that's going to appear on the screen now. Let's have a look what your answers are going to be, whether it's going to be higher or lower than the number that's on the screen. So get your fingers on the buzzers. What do points make? Points make claims, I would say, rather than prizes. So let's have a look to see what, we're going to carry on doing the poll for a few more seconds to make sure everyone's doing it, see what we can find out. We've got a few bits and pieces coming through on the chat as well as on the poll, so carry on for a second. Amber, once you hit 60%, if you can share the polls. So let's have a look what we've got. So most of you are going for higher. 81% of you are going for higher. So let's have a look and see what that was. So most of you got that right. The costs involved here were over £250,000. You can see on the screen where most of the costs were of that claim were associated with. The actual PCI fines and penalties accounted for around 2/3 of the total costs covered in this particular example. So pretty big cost for an SME to sort of absorb on their own if they didn't have any sort of form of cover.
James, I don't want to interrupt, but just to clarify, the stats we're showing, the numbers, these are actual real life claims for SMEs. So a company called Net Diligence maintains a database of actual breach stats that they get from a number of insurers. So this is not just travelers, this is all SME businesses who have responded to Net Diligence studies. So you think about, that's an average, right? Some are going to be higher, some are certainly going to be much higher. So, when you think about all SMEs having a PCI related breach, and some of them may get off easy, but when the average is 259, you're going to need that right amount of coverage in place. But this is market-wide data.
Yeah, and that will be for all the scenarios that we're going to talk about. Thank you, Davis. So let's move on to the next one. Let's see if you can get a full house and get all of these right. There's 3 of them to go for. Next scenario, we've got a council. So an employee in the council's accounts payable department receives an email purportedly from an established vendor changing the vendor's bank details. The employee then relies upon this fraudulent email instruction and changes the account detailed for the payment to be made. The insured discovers the fraud when the real vendor contacts them to request the payment. So let's have a look at what the cost may be and whether it's going to be higher or lower. So again, if you want to put your guess in the poll, or you want to put it in the chat function if it's not coming up on the screen, let's see if you guys can get the right answer. Got a lot of highs and lowers coming in. So let's have a look. Amber, once again, when it gets to 60 or so percent, let's share. Oh, so we've got a little bit of a difference here. 67% say it's going to be higher, 33% say it's going to be lower. Let's have a look, see what the answer is. So in this example, it was actually lower. And again, using the same data that Davis just mentioned from net diligence, forensic and legal costs are often lost in the mix of social engineering fraud, but they can be a significant proportion of the loss. And they were in this particular case, which was around £82,000, which again is no insignificant sum for any business, let alone an SME, to swallow. Okay, let's go on to our final example. So our final examples, let's see if you get a full house. This is an accountancy firm. So the accountancy firm's computer system is compromised by ransomware, and a ransom payment is demanded to unlock the system. IT forensic providers actually contain the virus and determine that the source of the infiltration is a vulnerability in the existing computer system. So upon recommendation from these IT forensic providers, the firm now purchases new software to improve its system security. So let's have a look to see how much that would cost. So you've got a number on your screen now. Again, for the final poll, let's see if you can get this right. Higher or lower for the number that's on your screen. Well, everyone's going for it now. Everyone's seeing if they can get it correct. Unfortunately, there's no prize of a car or anything to get this right, like the Price is Right, but there's confidence that you're pretty good. So, okay, so do you think the claim cost would be higher or lower? 71% said higher, 29% said lower. So let's see what it was. It's actually higher. So again, just slightly higher than the 100 grand, but it's worth noting that this is from Net Diligence 2019 study, so only a year ago. But the cost of ransom payments itself has actually skyrocketed since that time. The actual average ransom payment alone now is well over £150,000 plus all other resulting costs that could kick in from there. So that's just for a ransom payment on its own. So thank you everyone for taking part in that. That's just to give some feedback to us in terms of and knowledge to you in terms of the sort of sizes of claims involved. We're now going to move over to the next section. That's a tech issue. So in Travelers technology practice, we've got a specific solution available that's designed to ensure a broad range of tech companies. These tech companies would range from software developers and data centers to medical device manufacturers, life science research and development companies, and electronic assembly risks. So I'm now going to pass over to Mark Lawrence, our underwriting manager in our technology practice, to talk about some of the additional risks associated with these types of companies and some claims examples. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, we're writing first and third party cyber as part of a combined technology policy. So that's often with the professional indemnity covers included, but not exclusively. And I guess really I'd make the point that not all companies have a PI risk, professional indemnity risk, but it's likely all companies will have a cyber exposure of some sort. I guess take the example of a manufacturer of surgical instruments. So they might not have much of a PI exposure, but obviously a cyber attack could stop production. So really, I could have picked out a cyber incident from any of the sort of the tech sectors we insure. For example, an IT company could be a target for the data they hold, particularly if it was sensitive data such as card data or sort of healthcare records. But really, you know, anything sort of that falls into the category of PII could be deemed sensitive. Whilst a drug discovery company could be targeted for their intellectual property, which is probably quite opportune at the moment. I guess as well, some technology companies have also been seen as a gateway to their end clients. For example, if you think about a company that's providing, say, network services or web hosting services for members of the legal profession, where perhaps sensitive merger and acquisition information could reside. But what I will actually decided to do was talk about a recent incident we've seen, that, and this involved a software company. So this company provided CRM software, so that's client relationship management software solutions. So if I just kind of talk you through the circumstances here. So within our software company, a senior manager, he actually fell victim to a phishing email. And as a result of that, thousands of email addresses were compromised. So the perpetrator of this phishing attack, he used this information to send emails to those sort of stolen addresses, and that contained a link, and which would really compromise the data and the security of the computer system of anyone clicking on that link. So our insured first became aware of the issue when they received replies from the recipients of these emails. At that point, our insured acted very quickly. They managed to shut down and secure their systems within 30 minutes. They, at that point, obviously notified affected data subjects, so the individuals who had their email addresses compromised were notified, and also the Information Commissioner Officer, so the ICO. But subsequently, the ICO didn't take any action against our insured. They were apparently happy with the way that our company responded, the speed that they acted, and also the protections they actually had in place to secure the data. So I think really there were a number of learnings from this incident, and I'll sort of talk you through them. I guess number one, a tested business continuity plan assisted in the software company being able to respond quickly and efficiently. They knew what to do when the not so unthinkable happened. Secondly, managing the people exposure was already really high on the agenda actually before this incident of our IT company. So they did sort of regular training of their employees that included phishing exercises to see if an employee would click on an inappropriate link. But I guess what this incident sort of demonstrated was, really number one, sort of no company is immune, no matter how good the training and the IT protections. This was actually a client we'd met, so we did actually meet them to talk about their PI and their cyber exposures, to understand. I guess it was a two-way communication. We could explain to them about the covers, and they could really tell us about how they protected their IT network. But what was apparent from those meetings was they obviously gave us lots of information about their electronic protections, their antivirus, their firewall, their endpoint protection. But what was also apparent was that they had an open sort of no blame culture, and reporting of cyber incidents or clicking on an inappropriate link was encouraged. And I think this probably helped them being able to act so fast, and also obviously hence the positive response from the ICO. So this company, and this is sort of picking up on something that Lisa said earlier about multi-factor authentication. So this company already used MFA, obviously requiring more than one credential to log into the network. But what they've actually done is they've now extended it, and it's now required for all access to the network, for all parts of the network. And there are also auto alerts if access is pursued without using MFA. I guess on a general note, in view of the increased numbers of employees working remotely at home, perhaps like most of us actually, employee training on cybersecurity and the use of multi-factor authentication has probably assumed even greater importance. It's certainly something we ask about on our cyber prop when we get one completed, or if we're having conversations with insureds, whether that's in a face-to-face meeting, or obviously at the moment that tends to be via Skype or Zoom or Teams or any of the other remote ways of communicating with people. I guess carrying on the theme that we seem to have developed around television games, it has been argued that we are the weakest link in a company's cybersecurity, and so really understanding how a company manages the people risk is vitally important. Just kind of taking a high-level view at the sort of the policy covers that could come into play. Well, really, I suppose the potential first-party cyber covers that could be triggered include data restoration, costs for computer and legal experts, privacy breach notification costs. Now, in this particular example, no claims have come in from third parties so far from this incident, but of course, following a first-party event, there is the potential for third-party claims to follow, alleging a privacy security breach. And so, with the next example I'm going to talk about, sort of follows that theme. So this is another technology company providing sort of IT managed services for their clients, sort of data center services, web hosting, network services, and it does demonstrate a potential first-party cyber claim incurred by, if you like, company A, leading to a third-party claim against our IT company. So let me give you the background to this. So our tech company's client was hacked, and as a result, they incurred the following costs. So costs associated with cyber extortion. So this followed the ransomware attack. I think this particular ransomware actually disencrypted the data. It's probably fair to say that I think generally the cyber market has seen an increase in the use of ransomware. And obviously the associated claims following on from that. But the other costs they incurred were loss of their own Bitcoin. So they actually had invested in Bitcoin. The cost of IT forensics, which I think as James alluded to earlier on, can be obviously expensive. Reinstatement of their data. And their other sort of major loss was the business interruption, their business downtime. So following this, they actually put in a claim against our technology company, our insured. Basically, they claimed for these costs, and they alleged that the tech company had failed to patch their system with the appropriate software updates. And apparently, these costs were sort of alleged to have been so the cost of the Bitcoin, the forensics, the data restoration, the business interruption. These costs were alleged to have been sort of circa £1 million. But crucially, the contract between our IT company and their company, so the company that was hacked, those T's and C's, those terms and conditions, they contain a liability cap, which was based on the annual fees payable to the IT company. And those annual fees were around, from memory, around £250,000, which was obviously substantially below the amount that was being claimed of £1 million. And of course, as a result of that, it is possible that the claim could be settled based on this lower liability cap. So there are a few takeaways really from this incident. I guess from a first-party viewpoint, applying software patches in a timely manner is essential. I think Lisa mentioned the WannaCry attack on the NHS earlier in the webinar, actually, and I think from memory that actually highlighted the importance of software patches and updates being applied to neutralise vulnerabilities. I guess another point to sort of that came out from this really was that regular data backups can help mitigate the ransomware exposure. Although that actually does bring to mind, we actually saw a company that did suffer a ransomware attack, and they realised that their data backups had been unsuccessful for the previous 3 months. Which probably demonstrated backing up the data is one thing, verifying it's actually worked is certainly another. And it's something, again, if we're talking to clients, we do ask that question now. But I guess, of course, what this was to demonstrate, of course, this particular example was a first-party claim for one party can lead to a third-party claim for another. Obviously, particularly in the tech space, but obviously not exclusively there. And finally, the importance of professionally written terms and conditions with appropriate liability caps can potentially provide some protection, certainly in the tech space. So thank you for your time on that. I'm now going to hand over to David Kessler, Head of Cyber.
Thanks, Mark. Actually, before we leave that slide, we actually got a question from Scott Farrell saying one of the main objections we get is we outsource our IT. Do you have any good responses for this? Well, Mark's absolutely right. A lot of times what is a first-party matter to a tech company can be a third-party matter to a non-tech insured. And he absolutely just hit on one of the main reasons. Now, we touched this off on some of our other webinars, but the contractual liability cap that may be in the fine print in your client's contract with that tech provider. You know, Mark, what was the total amount of liability had it not been for the cap?
It would have been $1 million. And I guess, David, just to add, I think my comment would always be, you can outsource your IT, but you can't outsource your responsibilities.
Yeah, exactly. So you're always going to be responsible for the data that you've collected under GDPR, whether you're holding that or someone else is holding it on behalf of you. But that point about the contractual cap, that could come to limit the amount of indemnity that you could recover from that tech provider. Or it may be that even if the liability was under the contractual cap, maybe there are 500 other companies that are trying to claim against that same provider, because if they have a breach, they've probably had that breach applicable to multiple companies. So there's a number of reasons that you can approach that. I think the point that Mark made, that you're ultimately reliable, is always first and foremost. But remembering that you could have your indemnity capped is another one. All right. Thanks, Mark. So I have the pleasure of talking about cyber policy wording, which is kind of my favorite thing. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to cyber policies, but I certainly appreciate that it's difficult to understand everything that's out there. You know, this is my world, but it's not all that you guys have to deal with, and particularly with cyber, where there isn't a homogenous type of language out there yet. You know, it's not like DNO. Maybe we'll get there someday, where terms are common enough that policy A versus policy B are going to address the same coverage in the same way, but we're not there yet, and it's going to take a bit of a time for us to get there. One of the, I think, most complicated areas of a cyber policy is the business interruption coverage. So we're going to focus on that. Obviously, we could have this section talk about all sorts of things, but one thing at a time. So first thing I want to talk about is business interruption versus reputational harm. You've probably seen policies that have both. Maybe one policy only has business interruption but not reputational harm. First, how are they the same? You know, so really at the end of the day, they're both talking about income loss. So if your company has suffered some sort of event, we'll talk about the different triggers in a second, but some sort of event that's a cyber event, and as a result, their income stream isn't where it was. So let's imagine your income is a straight horizontal line. You are, if you can click over to the next slide, sorry. Okay, so let's imagine your income stream is, oh, that came up fast. Happy days, we're already there. Okay, so your turnover is a straight horizontal line. You're making 5,000 pounds per day, or whatever it may be. After the incident, you suffer a reduction of that. Your customers have left. Maybe they start coming back. Both the reputational harm and the business interruption coverage are going to pay that part in the middle. So what is the gap? I didn't talk fast enough for the slide, but what is that gap between your actual income versus what you anticipated had there not been a breach? Both reputational harm and BI are designed to fill that gap. That's about where they end in terms of being the same. Business interruption will almost universally apply to the insured's computer systems. So think about a retail company, and if their point of sales are down, they quite literally just cannot transact business. Their income's going to suffer because their computers are out. Or if they're an online retailer and their websites are down, or if they're a manufacturer and they can't produce their materials because that's run by a computer and the computers are down. So the key thing to know is business interruption will stem from a computer system interruption. Reputational harm, as the name implies, stems more from the reputation of the insured. The insured doesn't even have to sustain a computer outage necessarily, but if they have a privacy breach, for example. So go back to that same retailer. Maybe their point of sale systems are still working, but they've had a breach, customer financial data, customer payment card information has been leaked to the world. And as a result, customers feel uncertain about doing business with that insured. So even though the computers are still working, customers have left. And as a result, the insured has suffered that income loss. That's going to be where reputational harm steps in and pays that resulting income difference between where you think turnover is going to be and where your turnover actually is. If it's a privacy breach by itself, that's really only going to be covered by a reputational harm because, again, your computer systems are what triggers the business interruption. We'll talk about the waiting period here. So a waiting period applies to the business interruption, and a monetary excess applies to reputational harm. But what is a waiting period? You may see the words on the page and it may not make sense, but basically what it boils down to is it's a time excess for business interruption claims. The idea is, we want our insureds to have an interest in fixing their own system. So we're going to say, again, we're going to pay that gap between where your income should have been and where it actually is, but there's going to be a little sliver of time at the beginning that acts as the excess for the policy that's intended for the insureds to fix it themselves, essentially. So it acts as the excess in that sense. Most standalone policies are between 8 and 12 hours these days. Some policies are still longer in terms of what that waiting period is. Certainly, if you're looking at a package policy, that may be even 24 hours, which in the world of computer downtime is quite a long time. There's a variant called time franchise, which actually will revert coverage to the very beginning of the outage period if that time, 8 hours or 12 hours, whatever it may be, has been exceeded. But in those cases, it will then apply a monetary excess in place of the time excess. Final note here, I'm going to touch on it a couple times. Pay attention to the policy wording. So some will say an interruption to the insured's computer systems. Some will say an interruption to the insured's operations, business operations, as a result of computer systems being down. It's very nuanced, but it can actually make a big difference in certain scenarios. We'll go through a couple in a minute. In terms of the period of coverage or how long a policy is going to pay. So the wait period's been triggered or exceeded, and we're now into coverage. How long will that apply? That's often called the period of restoration or the period of indemnity. You'll see it a couple different ways. Basically, this says this establishes an endpoint. So, worst case scenario, right? Your systems are down and you never get them back up and running. Hopefully, not going to happen very often, and I think the stats show that. But this is what will set an end date. I think it's really easy and understandable to focus on just the numbers. So some policies may give as little as 30 days. Some policies may give a full year. Our policy, for example, gives 120 days. But oftentimes, the actual words are going to be more important than the number of days alone. I put a stat up there that's from UK government survey. 98% of UK companies had their computer systems restored within a month, fully restored. So, if you're looking at a policy that's 180 days versus 365, again, can't rule out the, as an impossibility, but odds are you're not going to have a computer outage that lasts that long. I think in that same study that I've cited, it's actually something like 96% within a week. So every minute matters, of course, and nobody wants to be down for even a couple days, let alone a week. But the likelihood of being down for a full year hopefully is not too big. But again, the words on the page matter. So let's go to the next slide here. So let's take first the waiting period. We've got a manufacturing insured. They suffer a cyber attack that causes a computer outage, which impacts their production. But as you can imagine, that it's not like a hard and fast, as soon as computers are back up and running, that the manufacturing is back up and running. There's a lot of processes in between that the insured will need to, click into place after the computers are restored. So let's assume a 12-hour wait period. And here in this scenario, we have a cyber attack that occurs at midnight. Computers are restored at 6 a.m. And then the following midnight, the actual operations are fully restored. If policy A requires the computer outage to exceed the wait period, again, remember the wait period is 12 hours, the computers have only been out for 6 hours. That policy is not actually going to provide any coverage because the outage to the computers have not exceeded the amount of time that the wait period stated. Policy B, however, requires that the business operations be impacted. Again, it's going to need that trigger. Obviously, the cyber attack to computers has to trigger it. It's not any outage of your operations. But here, we've had our business operations impacted because of a computer attack, and our actual business operations outage was 24 hours. That exceeds the wait period. We subtract the wait period again as the excess. That policy is going to provide 12 hours of coverage. So it's a really nuanced difference, but you've gone from no coverage to half a day's worth of your manufacturing output. This has the same impact on the period of indemnity. So how long a policy may be triggered. So let's take the same exact scenario here, manufacturing, 12-hour wait period. Again, midnight on the first day is the cyber attack. Here we are well past either case on the first page of computers being restored. So computers are out for 2.5 days, but then the operations don't get fully restored until the end of 5 days. So here, scenario 1, policy A, the period ceases when the computers are restored. A lot of policies still have this as the end point for business interruption coverage. If the policy says that, there's actually only going to be 2 full days of coverage. So computers have been out for 2.5 days. You subtract the 12-hour wait period, results in 2 days of coverage. Policy B, on the other hand, ceases when the business operations are fully restored. That policy is going to pay out for 4.5 days of coverage because it recognizes that your business operations may not be fully restored the moment that your computers are restored. So really nuanced, and I'm not saying it's easy, but you're going to have to be mindful of these slight nuances. Last slide for me. A couple other concepts when it comes to business interruption are extra expense, and fairly new to the cyber world is the concept called bricking. So starting with extra expense, this is sometimes called increased cost of working. It's actually not new to the cyber world. A lot of property policies, property business interruption policies already had this concept built in. So take, for example, if your commercial property suffered a fire and to lessen the impact of the business outage, you can hire a substitute place of business, whatever it may be, retail, manufacturing, whatever. That concept already exists in the insurance world, but now that certainly applies to a cyber policy as well. So take, for example, if your computers are impacted and you need to keep your IT personnel on board for 24 hours straight, or you need to hire temporary employees, that's all going to be increased costs of working. That, and if you look at the left-hand side, that's the policy on the page. So it was triggered by a cyber incident. It's not costs that you would have incurred. It's ultimately intended to reduce income loss. the purpose of this coverage is to benefit both insureds and the insurer, because it's going to lessen the amount paid at the end of the day. There's really no limitation on what can be included, so long as it meets the 4 prongs on the left-hand side of the screen. But the savvy amongst you may realize that most policies, cyber policies, have traditionally included a property exclusion. So if you think about a lot of cyber-related issues when it comes to business interruption, stems from servers being inoperable, basically. You know, they might not have burned down, although I guess it's conceivable, but they're unreadable because the ransomware has locked it up. You know, what Lisa was talking about earlier. Sometimes it can overheat and actually be physically damaged. But oftentimes it is cheaper to just replace the piece of equipment or the software than fix the issue, to remove the corruption, to remove the malware. Policies that have a full-blown property exclusion actually technically wouldn't be able to replace that server, because the property damage exclusion would kick in. So this concept called bricking, we call it non-functional equipment, has come into the market, which says extra expense includes the cost to replace any actual unreadable equipment, non-functioning equipment, with the functional equivalent equipment. So the one thing I would say here, I think absolutely all good cyber policies should have this, but not all do. The other thing I would note is a lot of times I've seen bricking being added as kind of the coverage side. So clarifying that, yeah, we'll cover bricked equipment, but then they don't actually fix the PD exclusion, the property damage exclusion, and add a write back for the bricked equipment. So, you know, I'm not suggesting other markets are going to apply the exclusion when they've given the intent of covering it, but just to be sure, you should make sure that the property damage exclusion has been amended accordingly, and ours does that. So we have quite a few really good questions that have come through already, and bear with me. James, do you have some teed up?
Yeah, so just so for everyone's benefit on the call, so if you look on the Q&A box down below, you'll see that we've answered some questions already, and we've got some open questions that we're trying to take in this forum before we close the webinar. So first one I'm just going to throw out there, some policies seem very restrictive in terms of cybersecurity requirements in order for claims to be paid. Whilst most larger businesses can and do comply, many smaller businesses simply don't. Additionally, many require dual financial controls to make single payments. So unless I've misunderstood the minimum requirements placed on businesses, is there a resource we could signpost clients to ensure they've got the minimum requirements? So Davis, there's probably one for you about the minimum sort of security requirements, etc., for businesses.
Yeah, this is often a point that I'll bring up when we do a webinar and we're talking about you know, common objections to buying a dedicated cyber policy, and it may be, oh, we've got a bit of cyber, you know, thrown in as a package policy or something like that. A lot of those policies will have some of these restrictive conditions that I think you're getting to. So conditions like you maintain your systems with up-to-date patching at all times, or wear and tear exclusions, or industry standard, whatever that is, security protocols. I would definitely be mindful of those, particularly the patch management one. You know, in my opinion, the cyber policy is meant to be there when you make a mistake. You know, an employee may mess up, may forget to install a patch on any given day. Are we going to underwrite to that? Yeah, absolutely. We're going to ask whether you have a policy for doing patch management, but we don't have any exclusion that then says, gotcha, on this particular Tuesday, you forgot to do it. Therefore, coverage won't apply. So that I definitely think you can avoid those types of security conditions or exclusions, but definitely be mindful of those.
Thanks, Davis. There's another question on here from Frank. If a company has a cyber incident and as a result they have fines imposed on them by the data protection commissioners, are these covered? And the implication as well is around that particular company acting responsibly or not if these fines are paid. Davis, maybe that's another one for you.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and it's not yet tested. Every policy, ours included, is going to say, well, first of all, not all policies pick up regulatory fines. So first and foremost, make sure that the policy you're looking at does. But I can't say every policy that does extend to regulatory fines is going to say where insurable. Therein lies the insert dollar or pound, whatever monetary figure here. There's a lot of legal analysis out there trying to answer this question. Will, in the UK or elsewhere under GDPR, will those fines be insurable? And it will probably vary on a case-by-case basis. I think what we've seen, two answers to this really. We've seen the ICO give an indication that they're only going to apply these fines when there's been kind of a heightened negligence, a gross negligence. If you apply that to the existing case law on insurance coverage, the going suggestion is, and this isn't just my analysis, a lot of legal firms have provided the same, that those would not be insurable. But two things to point out. One, a good policy is going to pay the defense costs regardless of whether the fine is ultimately insurable. And two, the other key aspect about buying a dedicated cyber insurance policy is you get the breach response team that comes along with it. And we've seen incidents where there's been a breach, but because we get the right experts in and they address it, quickly, professionally, they know the right things to look for, they know the right things to say to the ICO is perfectly happy with the way they responded and hasn't issued any type of fine or actions that the insured needs to do. So having that good response may avoid the fine in the first place.
Okay, brilliant. Now, conscious of time, so we've got a few minutes left and we've got about 9 open questions here. Some of them are quite long and lengthy. I don't know if you want to dive in and have a look.
Yeah,
Davis, Mark and Lisa, because some are being answered now.
Mark Boland, get in touch with us. That's a lengthy one, and I don't want to misinterpret it. So we'll by all means, anybody that has a question, get in touch with our team afterwards.
Yeah. Is there any sort of short questions you want to answer here, sort of, Davis, in view of the time? Frank's question has 3 upvotes. Let's have a look. Where's Frank's question? Yeah, so that's important.
Sorry, they keep moving.
Okay, so have you come across a cyber incident where the MFA multi-factor authentication was also intercepted by the hacker?
We haven't come across such an incident, but that's not to say that MFA can't be. Everything has its vulnerabilities, but we do say that MFA is obviously a good control to have in place. What we have actually seen is companies that have been hit where there was MFA in place, but only for the directors, say, whereas the other members of staff didn't have the MFA, and they managed to get through that way. So I think it can be, but it's obviously harder to do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Conscious of time now, but we could and look at some of the short questions we've had. We'll get round to actually answering your questions. Actually, we've got your details. Well, there's an anonymous person who put something on 1 minute before, or 11:59, which is actually a really good question. Given such a broad set available of wordings in the market, and with such slight differences, which could have much wider effects to covers, brokers may be fearful of giving wrongful advice on their PI. Do you have any advice for brokers who are simply fearful of mis-selling cyber and ultimately avoid pushing it?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and I think that there's reasons to have that. I will say, you know, it's not one or two markets out there that provide good coverage. Certainly, if you recommend Travelers, I think you're ticking all the right boxes. But there are others. I think becoming knowledgeable, you know, is the first step. There is some legwork that you'll have to do, but I think the rewards are actually far more beneficial than the potential, you know, PI drawbacks. There's still a very low take up of cyber insurance, and there's a lot of future premium in this space. And I really do think those brokers that make that effort to educate themselves and can recognize what a good policy looks like and can talk to their clients about how those policies meet their exposures, they're going to reap the benefits and really gain the confidence. I mean, not just selling cyber premium, but just gaining the confidence of their insureds. Mark, you want to follow up on anything there?
I guess the only thing I'd say is certainly on tech on our bigger clients, we've gone out with brokers when we were allowed to do so, and actually met the client to talk through the covers and talk through the exposures and talk through their protections, and that's been a really sort of useful two-way dialogue. And obviously in the last 6 months we've done some of that over the phone. So certainly on the tech side, we're happy to do that where it's been appropriate.
Brilliant. I think we'll leave it there in terms of time, because we don't want to run over an hour. We have done already. So there's a number of questions. We will answer those, and thank you very much for the questions. But if you do have any further questions, on the screen now, you'll see some contact details for regional distribution managers such as myself around the UK. If Amber, you can move on to the next slide. As well as, yeah. Thank you. That's the team around the UK you probably got invites from in your local area. But if we go back one slide, there's a full contact details of everybody who's been on this call today. So thank you very much for your time. We really do hope that you've at least learned something and taken away something from this to make you have those conversations with your clients around cyber. Thank you very much, and the presentation will be shared afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Cheers, boys.